There are sounds in rock and roll that are so fundamental, so elemental, they feel less like they were written and more like they were discovered, carved out of sonic bedrock in the early 1970s. The landscape of heavy music was being terraformed by giants from across the Atlantic. The mystical blues epics of Led Zeppelin, the gothic doomy sludge of Black Sabbath, the operatic bombast of Deep Purple. This was the sound of British rock conquering the world. It was complex, it was theatrical, it was grand. But then a different kind of roar began to echo out of California. It was a sound stripped of all pretense. It was leaner, meaner, and built for speed. It wasn't about castles or wizards. It was about cheap thrills, fast cars, and loud parties. It was the sound of American hard rock being born, a new declaration of independence written in power chords and feedback. And the man holding the chisel, the architect of that revolutionary sound, was a quiet, intense guitarist named Ronnie Montrose. If you're a musician, especially a guitarist, you probably just felt a jolt of recognition. You know the name. You know the legend. You know the earth-shattering importance of that first self-titled album. But for so many music lovers, even those who know every note of the songs he inspired, his is a story that has unjustly faded into the background static of rock history. He was the pioneer who laid down the blueprint for a sound that would dominate the next decade. He was the demanding visionary bandleader who discovered a fiery, unknown singer named Sammy Hagar and gave him his first shot at glory. So why has this giant of the guitar, this foundational figure, become rock's great forgotten man? Why did a career that started with such a thunderous, history-altering roar descend into decades of bewildering creative wandering, painful personal struggle, and ultimately a tragedy so profound it still feels incomprehensible? This is not just the story of a guitarist who played loud. It's the story of a restless and brilliant artist, a man at war with his own perfectionism, who gave American rock and roll its definitive voice and then spent the rest of his life desperately trying to find his own. This is the deep, often painful, and long overdue story of what really happened to Ronnie Montrose. To truly understand the complex artist Ronnie Montrose would become, you have to understand the contrasting worlds that shaped him. He was born in San Francisco in 1947, but his formative years were spent in the relative isolation of Colorado. This wasn't the swinging cultural hub of London or the concrete jungle of New York. This was a place of vast skies and rugged mountains, a place that fostered a sense of independence and introspection. His father wasn't a musician, but a hi-fi audio enthusiast who treated sound with a kind of sacred reverence. The Montrose household wasn't filled with rock and roll, but with the sophisticated sounds of his father's collection, the intricate arrangements of big band orchestras, the improvisational genius of jazz legends like Dave Brubeck, and the flawless phrasing of master vocalists like Ella Fitzgerald and Frank Sinatra. This early immersive education in melody, harmony, and structure became deeply ingrained in Ronnie's musical DNA. He was learning the language of music in its most elegant forms long before he ever picked up an electric guitar. It's why, even in his most aggressive rock moments, there was always a powerful sense of musicality and precision that set him apart from his more blues-based, raw-powered peers. He didn't get serious about the guitar until he was a teenager, but when the British invasion hit, it hit him hard. The explosive, innovative playing of Jeff Beck, the fiery blues of Eric Clapton, the riff-heavy architecture of Jimmy Page, these were the sounds that ignited his passion. The guitar became his obsession. Like many restless teenagers with a dream, the world around him felt too small. At the tender age of 16, in a bold and desperate move, he ran away from home, chasing the siren song of a life in music. He eventually found his way back to his birthplace, the electric, chaotic, and artistically fertile cauldron of the late 1960s San Francisco Bay Area. This was the place to be. The summer of love had given way to a more serious, musically adventurous era. The city was the undisputed epicenter of a rock and roll revolution. Bands like the Grateful Dead, Jefferson Airplane, and Santana were not just writing songs, they were creating entirely new sonic landscapes. Legendary venues like the Fillmore and Winterland were the temples where this new religion was practiced nightly, under the watchful eye of the era's great impresario, Bill Graham. It was an intimidating, competitive scene, but for a guitarist with Ronnie's preternatural talent and dedication, it was a land of opportunity. He was quiet and unassuming off stage, but with a guitar in his hands, he was undeniable. He quickly earned a reputation as a musician's musician, a guy who could be dropped into any musical situation, from free-form jazz to structured pop, and not only hold his own but elevate the material. His first major break came through David Rubinson, a producer associated with Bill Graham, who recognized Ronnie's immense potential. Rubinson began recommending him for high-level session work, a testament to his versatility. Imagine being a young, relatively unknown guitarist and getting a call to play on a record with a forward-thinking jazz icon like Herbie Hancock. Ronnie got that call, contributing to Hancock's experimental Mwandishi album. But the gig that truly put him on the map was a call from Van Morrison. The famously mercurial Irish singer-songwriter was recording his new album, Tupelo Honey, in 1971. Ronnie was hired as one of the session guitarists, and his playing on that record is a masterclass in taste and restraint. His delicate acoustic work and the soaring melodic electric guitar solo on the track Wild Night showcased a sensitivity and soulfulness that proved he was far more than just a rock gunslinger. He understood songcraft. His next move, however, would be a hard pivot, plugging him directly into the high-voltage, high-volume world of arena rock. He joined the Edgar Winter Group, a band renowned for its flamboyant, high-energy live shows. He was a key player on their 1972 breakthrough album, They Only Come Out at Night. That album was a commercial monster, spawning two massive hits. Ronnie's gritty, memorable riff powers the infectious rocker Free Ride, and he was an integral part of the sprawling, groundbreaking instrumental epic Frankenstein, which became a #1 hit. Touring with Edgar Winter gave Ronnie his first real taste of rock stardom. The screaming crowds, the massive arenas, the wild energy of life on the road. But Ronnie was a creator, a visionary. Being a sideman, even for a hugely successful act, was creatively unfulfilling. He had a sound percolating in his mind, a sound that was heavier, more direct, and more purely American than anything he had played before. He had paid his dues, he had honed his skills, and he had learned how the music industry machine worked. In 1973, at the age of 25, he walked away from the security of the Edgar Winter Group to build his own machine from the ground up. Ronnie knew precisely the kind of engine he wanted to build. He needed a rhythm section that was both powerful and nimble, a unit that could provide a foundation as solid as a concrete bunker, but could also swing. He found his men in bassist Bill Church and drummer Denny Carmassi, a formidable duo he had known from their time playing with Van Morrison. They had a near telepathic connection and the sheer muscle to underpin Ronnie's explosive guitar work. The machine was almost complete. It just needed a voice. The search for a frontman is often the most difficult part of forming a band, but for Ronnie, it ended with a stroke of serendipity. On a recommendation from a roadie, Ronnie went to a scruffy club in San Francisco to check out a local singer fronting a band called the Mobile Home. On stage was a kid with a wild, untamed mane of curly hair, a cocky swagger, and a voice that was an absolute force of nature, a soaring, powerful, and utterly commanding wail. His name was Sam Hagar. Hagar was everything Ronnie was not. Where Ronnie was introspective and musically cerebral, Sammy was a pure, unadulterated ID, charismatic, libidinous, and born to be a frontman. But it was the voice that sealed the deal. It was a voice that could not only compete with Ronnie's guitar, but could ride on top of it, pushing it to new heights of intensity. The chemistry was instant and explosive. This was the final crucial component. With a Warner Brothers contract secured, Ronnie brought his newly formed band into the studio with producer Ted Templeman. Templeman, who would later use his experience with Montrose to produce Van Halen, was a sonic genius who understood Ronnie's vision. He captured the band's raw live energy with a production style that was radically different from the reverb-drenched, polished sounds of the era. The result, recorded in a whirlwind of creativity and released in late 1973, was their debut album, simply titled Montrose. That album is not just a record, it is a sacred text of hard rock. It is one of the most perfect, influential, and flawlessly executed debut albums in the history of the genre. From the moment the sound of a sputtering motorcycle revs up and gives way to the snarling, iconic riff of Bad Motor Scooter, the listener is strapped into a sonic rocket. For 32 minutes, the album is a relentless, joyous assault of masterful guitar work, powerhouse vocals, and bone-rattling rhythms. Every track is a classic. Space Station No. 5, with its futuristic, phased-out riff and sci-fi lyrics, sounded like it had been beamed in from another galaxy. Rock the Nation was a pure, distilled shot of adrenaline. And then there was Rock Candy. Built on a primal, bluesy, and irresistibly sleazy riff, the song became their definitive anthem, a masterclass in slow-burning power and tension, with Hagar's wail soaring over Carmassi's thunderous drumming. The album was immediately hailed by critics and fellow musicians as a landmark. It was often dubbed America's answer to Led Zeppelin, and while the comparison was understandable in terms of sheer power, it was also incomplete. Montrose had stripped away the folk, the myth, and the orchestral arrangements of their British peers. They distilled the sound to its purest, high-octane form. This was music for the here and now, music for driving too fast down a desert highway, for cheap beer and sweaty, packed arenas. Ronnie's guitar tone on that record became the holy grail for a generation of guitarists. Using a Gibson Les Paul plugged into a Fender Tweed amp and cranked to its absolute breaking point, he created a sound that was thick, crunchy, articulate, and dripping with attitude. It was a sound that a young Eddie Van Halen in Pasadena, California, would study obsessively, a sound that directly influenced his own revolutionary brown sound that would change rock forever a few years later. The Montrose album was a flawless 5-star masterpiece, a bolt of lightning captured on tape. It should have been the glorious beginning of a long and legendary career for the band, but the very same intense visionary fire that had forged their brilliant debut would also be the one that burned the entire enterprise to the ground with shocking, tragic speed. The architect of the Montrose sound was also its uncompromising dictator. Ronnie Montrose was a relentless perfectionist, a man driven by a singular, unyielding musical vision. He had composed the riffs, he had arranged the songs, and he knew exactly how he wanted them to sound, every single night. He tolerated no deviation, no improvisation that wasn't sanctioned, no grandstanding. This rigid control created immediate and intense friction with his young, equally headstrong, and naturally flamboyant singer. Sammy Hagar was not built to be a puppet. He was a born rock star, a natural frontman brimming with charisma and a primal desire to connect with and whip up an audience. He saw the band's incredible potential for massive world-conquering success. He wanted to give the people the wild, heavy rock and roll party they craved. Ronnie, on the other hand, was a far more complex and insecure artist. He was deeply ambivalent about the heavy metal tag and saw hard rock as a simplistic, passing fad. He craved the respect of the more serious music world, the world of jazz and fusion he had come from. This fundamental clash of philosophies exploded during the making of their second album, 1974's Paper Money. In what stands today as one of the great tragic miscalculations in the annals of rock history, Ronnie sat the band down and declared that they were too late, that the metal trend was already over, and that they needed to fundamentally change their sound to survive. Hagar was completely dumbfounded. He was on the front lines every night. He could feel the energy building. He could see the hunger in the crowds for exactly what they were delivering. He wanted to double down on the heavy, riff-based sound they had so brilliantly pioneered. Ronnie wanted to evolve, to pull back, to explore more melodic, complex, and musically sophisticated territory. The clash of wills was epic and constant. Ronnie, as the undisputed band leader and primary songwriter, held all the power. He controlled the musical direction, and Hagar felt increasingly stifled. His own songwriting contributions and ideas for a heavier direction often dismissed or ignored. The tension reached its boiling point during a European tour in early 1975. Accounts of the final straw differ. Some say it was an argument over an interview, others a culmination of on-stage frustrations. But the result was the same. In February 1975, after only 2 albums and less than 2 years together, Ronnie Montrose fired one of the greatest and most promising rock singers of all time. It was a catastrophic, career-altering decision driven by artistic pride and a clash of personalities. As Hagar would reflect years later with a mix of frustration and understanding, he obviously felt snubbed and he kind of wanted to be respected as a musician more than me. I just wanted to be a star. Ronnie got his wish. He was now free to pursue his eclectic musical muse without interference. But in doing so, he had willfully jettisoned the very element, the raw, charismatic vocal firepower that gave his band its broad, undeniable appeal. The original lineup, the one that had created pure, unadulterated magic, was gone forever. Montrose, the band, would continue for 2 more albums with a new singer, Bob James, but the chemistry was gone. The lightning was gone from the bottle. A few years later, a band called Van Halen, produced by the same Ted Templeman and fronted by a charismatic, high-kicking singer with a powerful voice, would take the Montrose blueprint, inject it with a new level of guitar pyrotechnics and showmanship, and become the biggest band in the world. The profound, bitter irony was not lost on anyone, least of all Ronnie Montrose. Freed from the commercial expectations and personality clashes of his flagship band, Ronnie Montrose embarked on a fascinating, unpredictable, and often commercially frustrating musical journey. His career for the next 3 decades would be a testament to his artistic restlessness and his stubborn refusal to be pigeonholed. If the fans wanted him to be the king of hard rock, he would deliberately abdicate the throne. His first move after dissolving the Montrose band was a complete rejection of the rock frontman format. In 1978, he released an all-instrumental solo album, Open Fire. It was a daring and deeply personal project, a showcase for his technical prowess and his enduring love for the complex harmonies and improvisational spirit of jazz fusion. The album was full of soaring melodies, intricate arrangements, and breathtaking guitar work. It was a bold and brilliant artistic statement that, unsurprisingly, baffled and alienated many of the hard rock fans who only wanted to hear the visceral crunch of rock candy. In 1979, he formed a new band, Gamma, with Scottish singer Davy Pattison. With Gamma, Ronnie plunged into the sounds of the late 70s and early 80s, exploring a more polished, keyboard-heavy AOR sound, incorporating elements of the burgeoning new wave and electronic music scenes. The band produced 3 albums of well-crafted, often atmospheric rock, and even scored a minor hit with the song I'm Alive. But they never came close to achieving the commercial success or cultural impact of the early Montrose. To many old-school fans, it felt like Ronnie was deliberately and perversely running away from the very sound that had made him famous. This became the defining, and for many frustrating, pattern of his career. He was a musical chameleon, a restless seeker always in search of a new sound, a new texture, a new challenge. He released more instrumental albums, he worked as a producer for other artists, and in a particularly surprising move in the mid-90s, he composed the eclectic, multi-genre soundtrack for a Sega Saturn video game called Mr. Bones. He was a true artist, always pushing his own boundaries, but this constant shifting also meant he never built a consistent brand or a stable, loyal fan base. He was too hard rock for the jazz fusion crowd and too experimental and cerebral for the die-hard rock and roll crowd. He existed in a creative no man's land of his own making. Behind this artistic restlessness, however, lay a deep and painful personal struggle that Ronnie kept intensely private for most of his life. He projected an image of cool, focused intensity on stage, but inwardly, he was a man plagued by severe personal demons. His wife of many years, Lisa, would later reveal the heartbreaking truth. Ronnie suffered from lifelong debilitating clinical depression. She traced it back to a difficult childhood that left him with a profound and unshakable sense of inadequacy, a feeling that no matter what he achieved, it was never good enough. He was, in her words, very hard on himself. This wasn't just artistic temperament. It was a crippling form of perfectionism. He could play a sold-out show, receive multiple standing ovations from a rapturous, adoring crowd, and spend the entire drive home obsessing over a single note he felt he missed, or a slight imperfection in his tone that no one else could possibly have noticed. This single, devastating detail offers a profound glimpse into the mind of a brilliant artist who could never live up to his own impossible standards, who could never allow himself to simply enjoy his own triumphs. This crippling self-doubt was exacerbated by a decades-long, grueling battle with alcoholism. For years, he drank to self-medicate his social anxiety and his deep-seated depression, a tragically common story in the high-pressure, high-stakes world of professional music. The wild rock guitarist persona that the public saw was, in large part, a mask, a character he could inhabit to hide a man who was deeply uncomfortable in his own skin and terrified of being exposed as a fraud. The quiet genius was at war with himself, a conflict far more intense than any creative disagreement with a bandmate. In the mid-2000s, Ronnie Montrose, a man who had already fought so many internal battles, was forced to confront a new and terrifying external enemy. In 2007, he was diagnosed with prostate cancer. The disease and its aggressive treatment were debilitating, forcing him into a kind of musical exile. In a candid 2011 interview, he admitted with a palpable sense of loss, "I didn't touch a guitar for 2 years." For a man whose entire identity, his very reason for being, was so intrinsically tied to his instrument, This was a crisis of profound existential proportions. But Ronnie was a fighter. He faced the disease with the same quiet intensity he applied to his music. After a grueling struggle, he announced in 2009 that his cancer was in remission. This stark brush with mortality seemed to forge a new perspective in him. He finally quit drinking for good and poured his energy back into his music with a renewed vigor and a palpable sense of gratitude. He began touring frequently, playing his classic Montrose material with a joy and fire that many fans hadn't seen in decades. It felt less like a nostalgia act and more like an artist reclaiming his own legacy. He even began to mend long-broken fences. He reconnected with Sammy Hagar, the two men putting aside decades of conflict and misunderstanding. They performed together, and plans were even in the works for a full-blown reunion of the original Montrose lineup at Hagar's legendary annual birthday bash in Cabo San Lucas. The rock and roll world was buzzing. It felt like one of its most fractured and tragic stories was finally heading towards a happy, redemptive, and long-awaited third act. The forgotten father of American rock was ready to take his victory lap, but the demons that had haunted Ronnie Montrose for his entire life, the depression that had been his constant unwelcome companion since childhood, had not been vanquished. They had only been lying dormant, waiting in the shadows. On March 3rd, 2012, the rock world was blindsided by the news that Ronnie Montrose had died at the age of 64. Initially, his family, in a state of shock and wanting to protect his hard-won legacy, led the public to believe that he had lost his 2-year battle with cancer. The narrative was that of a brave warrior succumbing to his illness. The truth, when it emerged weeks later in a formal coroner's report, was far more tragic, shocking, and difficult to comprehend. Ronnie Montrose had died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. A toxicology report revealed that his blood alcohol level was nearly 4 times the legal driving limit. After years of sobriety, he had relapsed in the final hours. The man who had survived cancer, who was planning a triumphant reunion, who seemed to be on a clear upswing, had taken his own life. His family, in a heartbreaking act of courage and honesty, later released a statement confirming that Ronnie had lost his lifelong private battle with clinical depression. He hadn't left a note. He hadn't given any outward indication of his final desperate intentions. The man who gave so much power, confidence, and joy to others through his music had been living in a state of unbearable private pain. The news was a devastating, brutal reminder that the wounds we cannot see are often the most fatal, and that even our strongest heroes can be fighting for their lives in silence. So what is the ultimate legacy of Ronnie Montrose? In the crowded pantheon of rock gods, his name is often spoken in hushed, reverent tones by those in the know, the musicians, the producers, the hardcore fans. But it lacks the universal household name recognition of a Hendrix, a Page, or a Clapton. And yet his influence is as profound and far-reaching as almost any of them. He is the crucial, often overlooked, and absolutely essential bridge between the first wave of British heavy rock and the explosive dominance of American hard rock and metal in the late 70s and throughout the 80s. Without the first Montrose album, the musical landscape would look radically different. There is simply no Van Halen as we know it. Eddie Van Halen, by his own admission, was a devoted student of Ronnie's work. His entire approach to rhythm guitar playing, the syncopated power chords, the driving, aggressive riffs, even the raw, direct into the amp brown sound, was built on the foundation that Ronnie had laid down on that seminal 1973 record. Ted Templeman used what he learned producing Montrose to help Van Halen craft their own world-changing debut. The lineage is direct and undeniable, and the influence doesn't stop there. Countless other bands, from Iron Maiden, who famously covered Space Station No. 5, to hard rock giants like Def Leppard, Motley Crue, and Guns N' Roses, owe a profound stylistic debt to his pioneering sound. He was the quintessential guitarist's guitarist, an undisputed master of tone, technique, phrasing, and melody. His significance also lies in his stubborn, unyielding artistic integrity. In a music industry that rewards formula and repetition, he refused to make the same record twice. He chose the difficult, lonely path of constant evolution and experimentation. This may have cost him millions in record sales and a more stable career, but it preserved his artistic soul. He made music for himself, first and foremost, a lesson in creative purity that is both deeply admirable and, as his life so tragically showed, potentially deeply isolating. His life is also a powerful and cautionary tale. It is a heartbreaking story about the devastating impact of untreated mental illness, even in the face of immense talent and success. He was a man who gave the world a sound that was the very definition of confidence, power, and swagger, while he himself was consumed by a crippling cocktail of self-doubt, anxiety, and insecurity. This profound, tragic disconnect between the art and the artist is at the very heart of his story. In the end, Ronnie Montrose remains one of rock and roll's most brilliant, influential, and heartbreaking figures. He was a quiet, introspective man who made a gloriously loud and unapologetic noise. He was the architect who designed a palace of American hard rock, but could never bring himself to live in it comfortably, always drawn to wander off and draft new, more complicated blueprints. He gave a generation of musicians their foundational text and then walked away to write his own, more personal and esoteric library. His story is a vital reminder that the music we love, the art that gives us strength and joy, often comes from places of deep and hidden pain. It reminds us that the artists who create it are not mythical gods, but fragile, complex human beings, fighting battles we can't always see and don't always win. Ronnie Montrose may be the forgotten father of American rock, but his children are everywhere. His riffs are embedded in the very DNA of the genre. And for anyone who has ever turned up the volume, hit the gas, and felt the pure, liberating, transformative power of a great rock and roll song, his spirit is still right there, riding shotgun. He built the machine, and it's still running, as loud, as vital, and as timeless as ever. And that wraps up today's video. If this video resonated with you, please give it a like, leave a comment with your feedback, and subscribe to stay updated on upcoming videos. Appreciate you watching.